Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming, and once again, a request video. This video was requested by Nicolo, who has supported Monster Kingdoms on BackerKit. Thank you very much, Nicolo. And Nicolo made a request to me. You see, when you order a hard copy of Monster Kingdoms, you can make a request via MatthewDawkins.com and ask for a video to be made. We will either talk it over if the video is unworkable, or I will just go out and do it. And this is one of those ones where I can just go out and do it. You see, Nicolo is not only a supporter of Monster Kingdoms on BackerKit, but also a supporter of my Patreon, and I need to thank him for that. It's fantastic company, and I really appreciate that he has made this request. You see, he wanted to know about the infamous dungeons of Monster Kingdoms and how they work. Given that in Monster Kingdoms your characters tend to be evil-natured, tend to be pretty damn monstrous, both in behaviour and appearance, and dungeons, historically, in fantasy games, are things that heroes delve in to conquer. Dungeons come in various forms in Monster Kingdoms. You can build your own, you can wrangle monsters and beasts to populate your dungeons, you can install traps, pitfalls, and lures for heroes and scavenging and looting and adventuring monsters to come for. That is one part of the game. It has an entire subsystem, one of the appendices of the book, and it's a pretty comprehensive one too. But there are, of course, also the dungeons that you venture into. Now, dungeon crawling and conquering a dungeon isn't, by its nature, a heroic deed. Ultimately, you are venturing in, perhaps to slay a beast that is terrorizing the local countryside, maybe to steal its wealth or its power. Perhaps you just want the honor, the glory of having been the adventurers to conquer this particular threat on the landscape. There's lots of reasons why you might seek out a dungeon and venture into it. And despite the fact the vast majority of our player characters in Monster Kingdoms are evil or chaotic or otherwise self-centered, doesn't mean they're not still attracted to dungeons. You see, dungeons are a part of the landscape that often fall into ruin. When castles are swept away or towns are demolished, it's the subterranean areas that persist. It's the subterranean areas where survivors crawl into to try and persist as well. Maybe this is the kind of thing that the world below comes from, but let's not get too distracted with other parts of the Earthbane cycle. Point being, dungeons last longer than the buildings above them. Dungeons, like cellars and basements, while not immune to devastation, will resist it. And the things that live within them may grow enmities, may well grow strange appetites, may well become fearful of the surface above. And that means that as these dungeons grow in legend, perhaps because other people have tried to settle the area and then beasts have occasionally ventured out and preyed upon them, it attracts adventurers to go in. Monsters in Monster Kingdoms aren't necessarily climbing into these dungeons to slay beasts and be heralded a hero, though doing so as an evil character is, again, totally legitimate. It's just you're likely to apply certain costs to being a hero, as the village are lifting you up onto their shoulders and saying, hurrah, hurrah for you, our brave orc champion. You at that point say, put me down. Now I expect you to pay me this many gold crowns. I want that castle over there redesignated in my name. I will claim all of the territory to the west of this village, and I will continue to protect you as long as you continue to pay me. Any week where you do not pay me, I will take your eldest son into my legion and train him to be a true warrior. There are ways you can do this dungeon crawling and reward afterwards that are patently evil. But let's talk about a few of the infamous dungeons of Monster Kingdom. Some of this will be improvised, some of this is from the manuscript. For example, in the manuscript we have the Dungeon of the Golden Heart, which is in the kingdom of Pandemion, a distinctly chaotic kingdom ruled over by a high goblin king, High King Dudgeon, who rules an anarchic domain, it has to be said, where there are laws, frequently change, where infighting is constant, but where inventiveness and art and craft and innovation are highly prized, especially when put toward deadly aims. And the Dungeon of the Golden Heart is one such dungeon. You see, this isn't a dungeon that's fallen to rack and ruin. This is not a dungeon that was forgotten when the town above it was annihilated. This is a dungeon that was constructed on the orders of High King Dudgeon's predecessor, as a trial, as a form of entertainment, as a means of testing the best of the monsters of Gewinn. You see, the Dungeon of the Golden Heart, which is in the high north of Pandemion, isn't just a subterranean climb. It goes through forests, it goes through frozen wastelands, mountain peaks, and is littered with treasures, traps, threats, innocents as well, some of them captive, civilians, but others who are planted there to give riddles and quests. This is the equivalent of a fantasy version of a almost reality game show. If you're familiar with fighting fantasy, it is like an outdoor death trap dungeon, although certainly there is a subterranean part of the Dungeon of the Golden Heart too, so I guess there is a literal death trap dungeon in there as well. The whole point of the Dungeon of the Golden Heart is the participants cannot just quit. They can't just claim a piece of treasure and then walk out. They need to complete the entire course. If they can't complete the entire course, punishment awaits them. So the strongest, the boldest, the most foolish idiots come along, committing themselves to the Dungeon of the Golden Heart, and at some point High King Dudgeon will say, You have conquered the dungeon. You are now a crown bearer. You are one of our champions. Congratulations. And you will be lavished with rewards. But Dudgeon is a little Caligula-like. He's not necessarily going to reward everyone at the same time, or in the same way, or in ways they might appreciate. That doesn't mean it's a completely foolhardy notion to seek out the Dungeon of the Golden Heart. Far from it. There is a lot of power that can be claimed there, and it is said that there are adventurers and adventuring parties that have taken on the Dungeon of the Golden Heart, empowered themselves enough, received message, no, High King Dudgeon isn't satisfied yet, you haven't conquered all of it, at which point they look to themselves and think, you know what, we're closer to the north coast than we are to the southern border. Let's snatch a vessel and sail out of Pandemion. Sometimes this sends Dudgeon into hysterical anger, and he will order a massacre of everybody, all of his stewards, all of his guards, all of the champions that were meant to defend the Dungeon of the Golden Heart and its rules. Other times, hysterics of laughter. Someone beat him, someone outwitted him, and which is why he has the coastline very strongly patrolled these days, because he's been caught out by this more than a couple of times. Every time the Dungeon of the Golden Heart opens up, and Pandemion makes a trade of procuring the strongest beasts, fashioning the most intricate and vile traps, setting up the most mind-bending of riddles. All the best craftsmen come to Pandemion to apply their trade on the Dungeon of the Golden Heart. Every time it draws even more wealth, because people from all of the Monster Kingdoms want to see who might finally conquer the Dungeon of the Golden Heart, who might humiliate High King Dudgeon. The only real rule of thumb is, if you're an observer, don't stand too close to the High King. Don't go for a VIP box or anything like that, because if he enters one of his fits of fury, sometimes he'll just land on the person close to him and say, I want that one dismembered for my amusement now. So that's the Dungeon of the Golden Heart. Now, you also have the Dungeon of the Hog, and this is one that I don't think we outline in the manuscript. It is in the centre of the Nythera Empire, on Nythera Isle, which is one of the centres of the Empire, where the dreadnoughts are trained. And that is what the Dungeon of the Hog is. It is a training dungeon, it's best described as. It's where all the dreadnoughts of the Nytheran Empire are expected to enter and test their mettle. The Dungeon of the Hog isn't what you would consider a, I guess, high-risk, high-danger dungeon, or at least never used to be. It could best be described as like an assault course that is specifically designed to test the mettle, the skills, the intelligence, the talents of dreadnoughts who are just joining the Dreadnought Legion. And so you enter either in parties or squads or legions or regiments in order to conquer it. Therefore, while it's been present for over 200 years, it isn't exactly littered with treasure. That isn't the point of the Dungeon of the Hog. There is treasure within, because some people who venture into it are killed. Some of them do fall into colossal traps. And that's where you need to start thinking of the Dungeon of the Hog as something of an opportunity. You see, in a place where entire legions can be wiped out with one trap, everything in the Dungeon of the Hog is built for scale. It is built for training a multitude of dreadnoughts, which means when one person dies down there, probably dozens, maybe hundreds of others die. So you're not going to be looking at a simple trap in a narrow corridor, a swinging pendulum that might take out one or two people, or a pit that opens up and one person falls on a solitary spike. You are looking at cavernous chambers that collapse on the heads of the people inside. You are looking at hordes of monsters that have been left to breed down there for decades before being unleashed. Finally, the portcullis is raised, and now you have basically an entire skirmish, if not battle, taking place underground in the Dungeon of the Hog. So arguably your chances are better if there are fewer of you, because you're less likely to trigger some of the traps, which means some enterprising adventurers from around the Monster Kingdom sneak into the Dungeon of the Hog to steal the treasures of fallen dreadnoughts and other adventurers, knowing that their numbers are unlikely to wake up the hundreds of creatures and traps and perils that exist within. It's not impossible, however. Now, the Dungeon of the Hog is seen as a rite of passage for a lot of the individuals from the Nythera Empire, especially the adventurous ones, but it didn't always act in that way. You see, it was built 200 years ago, and it was said to have been built as an underground temple to some hog pantheon, likely by some orcs, because they routinely worship porcine or porcine deities. These days, not so much. The Dungeon of the Hog has been refitted. About the only thing that is maintained is its name. But recently it was discovered that the unfortunate slaves who were sent in to set up traps were being locked in to feed the myriad of beasts that have been dragged down here, recruited and bred. And one of those slaves made it all the way back to the entrance, obviously in ruins, missing a limb, barely alive, and they reported back to the slave master that something has burrowed in through the ground underneath the Dungeon of the Hog, and now it is being populated by a terrible species of creature that has started entering, purloining, redecorating, if you like, making this dungeon up in ways that Nythera Empire's emperors and dungeon keepers and executioners never anticipated. From within, their training ground is being turned into a genuine meat grinder, where every single Dreadnought Legion that's sent in is finding themselves mauled, eviscerated. Even the ones who have procured illegal maps of the dungeon. Technically, you're not allowed a map of the Dungeon of the Hog if you're going in there to train, but obviously there's a black market in such things. Turns out the maps aren't quite as accurate as they used to be. Now they're leading people into fatal situations. The Dungeon of the Hog has been underestimated for a very, very long time. And it seems maybe these great porcine individuals, not orcs, something far more primordial, ancient in nature, that have started burrowing up with their tusks to invade the lower levels, want to reconsecrate it to their ancient gods. Maybe these are the ancient gods. Now, the last one I'll cover, just to give you a nice range of the kind of dungeons you're likely to see in Monster Kingdoms, is the Dungeon of the Bloody Worm, which is far to the south of Krior, the Kingdom of the Vampires. It is one of the oldest and deadliest dungeons in all of Gewinn, nestled far in the southwest of Krior. Before the vampires dominated Krior, a race of parasitic worm creatures dominated the land as far as the Harrowland Forest, where it is now anyway. And this was at the time, well, back when Warrior King Esper's ancestors were ruling what is now the Nythera Empire, the Kingdom of Fortunus. So this is well before the vampires claimed control. Now, it was through an act of supreme magic that these parasite creatures that could form humanoid bodies of writhing, bloody worms were driven utterly insane. Their intelligence was stripped from them through an act of great sacrificial magic. It's since been more or less lost to time, according to Krior anyway. Who enacted this magic? It's believed that it was a great union of the vampires of Krior, the wraiths of Dis, the orcs of Krush, the elementors of Brandir, but there's all kinds of origin stories for what led to the vampires becoming dominant in this space, and whatever the case was, it made these ooze-like worms no less threatening, but certainly less intelligent. And that was a vital part of Krior's history, you see. The parasitic worm creatures, they had magic and technology that was alien even then. Their knowledge, their abilities were utterly unlike those of anyone else in all of Gewinn, and that includes the Kingdom of the Malignant Mind. And often their magic and technology was of a horrifying nature. It was gloves off. The magic almost always required some kind of blood sacrifice en masse. The technology, likewise, machines powered by being fed living people or their organs, freshly harvested. But they were able to do great things, one could argue, including sending people up into the sky, where apparently they could build sky-based kingdoms. Whatever the case, they lost the ability and the affinity to use this magic. The magic was completely lost, stripped. These bloody worms were the only creatures that could. The technology, some of it still litters southwestern Krior, although the vampires and Himexi that have moved into that part of the world have very little capacity for utilizing it. The number of sacrifices required becomes wasteful when vampires are far better used for the living than fueling alien diabolic machinery. All that's really left of the former Kingdom of the Worms is the Dungeon of the Bloody Worm. It's believed that it was the palace at the heart of their kingdom once upon a time, and so it still stretches. Some of its pillars and towers still stretch above the earth, though much of it has been ruined in the times since. It's believed that the Himexi that are now so populous, even more so than the vampires, some might argue, in Krior, actually devoured so many of the non-intelligent parasitic worms in the last 3-4 centuries to gain their intelligence, but that's another story altogether. The Dungeon of the Bloody Worm still contains vast quantities of the parasite's magic and technological power, pretty much untouched. Because it's so deep in the heart of Himexi territory, very few living people would dare venture in, and even the vampires are pretty loath to do so. Their hold over the Himexi is tenuous, if indeed it was ever there. But the Dungeon of the Bloody Worm is one of those rare opportunities to actually seize some article of power that nobody else has in Gewinn. And as the monster kingdoms are falling increasingly to war with their neighbours, with the Nythera Empire, Everyone is looking for the weapon that might set them above their neighbours. The Dungeon of the Bloody Worm offers that kind of thing. The problem is you have to make your way through incredibly hostile territory to get there, and then you have to wade through the ruins of a palace that once belonged to an absolutely monstrous, malevolent people. And you know what? It's quite possible some of their intelligence exists in there still. Maybe they are just waiting. Maybe they are just waiting to rise up and take back the kingdom that was theirs. Maybe they've even formed an allegiance with the Hemaxi. That's probably another story for another day. The likelihood is that anyone who enters the Dungeon of the Bloody Worm is going to find it an incredibly lethal place. This is a dungeon that doesn't pull any punches. The Dungeon of the Golden Heart is there for entertainment. The Dungeon of the Hog is there for training. The Dungeon of the Bloody Worm is there to consume and kill and repurpose the body parts. This isn't a dungeon built in the traditional style with mechanical traps, with monsters that have been bred to prey on the people that have entered. This is, for all intents and purposes, an alien realm where you will little understand the surroundings. And certainly the creatures within it will be like passing back in time to a place where the monsters truly are monstrous, and the things they will do to you will make the sadism in the Ninth Era Empire look like being cuddled. Anyone brave enough to enter the Dungeon of the Bloody Worm and return with something usable in their hands, undoubtedly that person will be held up as a champion, to be feared. Perhaps unsurprisingly, it hasn't happened yet. The reason everyone is so vague about what this dungeon is because it is a one-way ticket. You enter, it might as well be a bottomless pit. A cavernous maw that chews up every single person that enters. Not even wraiths emerge of the dead. So even the Hemaxi give it a slightly wide berth. So that is how dungeons can work and become infamous even in an evil setting. Just because your characters aren't good doesn't mean you may not be tempted. The Dungeon of the Hog is the kind of place all Nytheran champions are likely to venture into. The Dungeon of the Golden Heart is where anyone opportunistic enough to become infamous is going to want to venture. And the Dungeon of the Bloody Worm is the kind of dungeon you will delve into if you really want an edge over your opponents. But gods help you, because the chances of survival are pretty minimal. Thank you very much for your question, Niccolo, and anyone who has found this at all appealing, do head on over to the backer kit for Monster Kingdoms, where we are still funding and still hitting stretch goals. It is the first link in the video description below, and I would love it if we got some more support. If you've got any questions regarding Monster Kingdoms and you pick up a hard copy, get in contact with me via MatthewDawkins.com and make your request. Thank you very much for watching, and be seeing you.